A real estate agent refused to show a black family a home, not realizing that they were her bosses. A mistake that would cost her everything. You're not on my schedule, the agent said, her voice sharp and dismissive. And this house is already reserved. Marcus Thompson took a slow breath, suppressing the wave of frustration rising in his chest. He held up his phone, the confirmation email displayed clearly. We scheduled a showing for 2 p.m. yesterday. It's confirmed, he said evenly, though his jaw tightened. The agent didn't even glance at the screen, instead letting out a short, exasperated sigh. I don't know what to tell you, she snapped. You're not on the list and I'm closing up now. With that, she turned, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement as she walked to the door. She locked it without a second glance, her back to the couple as if dismissing their very existence. Marcus turned to Layla, his hand gripping his phone tightly. She stood beside him, her face calm but her eyes flashing with restrained fury. She didn't even bother to check, Layla said, her voice low but trembling slightly. No, Marcus replied, his voice clipped, his frustration mounting. She didn't. The two walked back to their car in silence, their composed exteriors masking a whirlwind of emotions. Marcus, tall and commanding in his tailored navy suit, adjusted his jacket methodically, the movement almost mechanical. Layla followed, her beige dress catching the sunlight as she sat stiffly in the passenger seat. Her lips were pressed tightly together, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. From the car, they watched as another family arrived. This time, the agent's transformation was undeniable. The family, white and casually dressed, received a warm smile and a cheerful greeting as the agent unlocked the door without hesitation. She didn't even hesitate, Layla said, her voice sharp with disbelief and a sting of pain. We're standing right here, and she couldn't care less. Marcus clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. Let's wait, he said quietly, his tone low but filled with controlled anger. I want to see exactly how far she's willing to go. Layla nodded silently, the weight of the moment sinking in. What the agent didn't know was that her decision wasn't just discriminatory, it was disastrous. Marcus and Layla weren't just potential buyers. They owned the company she worked for, and the events of today would mark the beginning of her professional unraveling. Their footsteps echoed loudly against the pavement as Marcus and Layla approached the house again, their calm exteriors barely concealing the storm building beneath the surface. Inside, the White family strolled through the spacious entryway, their laughter spilling out into the quiet neighborhood. The real estate agent, catching sight of the Thompsons approaching, frowned and quickly stepped out onto the porch, shutting the door firmly behind her as though to bar their entry. I told you the house is reserved, she said sharply, glancing briefly over her shoulder to check on the family inside. Her tone was laced with irritation, but beneath it there was a flicker of unease. Marcus, his expression calm but his voice firm, responded, We're not here to cause trouble. We just want an explanation as to why this family is touring the house when you claimed it was reserved. The agent's frown deepened, her irritation growing at being confronted. They had a booking before you, she said curtly. You should look for another property. This house, it's not for you. Layla stepped forward, her posture graceful yet commanding. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with restrained anger. Not for us? She asked, tilting her head slightly. And what exactly does that mean? The agent hesitated, her eyes darting to the family inside. Finally, she replied, You don't fit the profile of this neighborhood. The neighbors here value peace and quiet. I think you'd find homes in other areas more suitable. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, a surge of anger coursing through him, but he held his composure. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and raised it, snapping a photo of the agent with the house in the background. What are you doing? The woman asked, her voice sharp and tinged with alarm. Gathering evidence, Marcus replied coolly. I'm sure your management will want to see how you're refusing to show homes to potential buyers. The agent's face tightened, and the arrogance she had shown earlier began to crack. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a more conciliatory tone. I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that this area has strict rules, and we try to find buyers who— Who what? Layla interrupted, her tone sharp. Let's be clear. Is this because of our skin color? The agent's mouth opened, then closed again. Her composure faltered as she quickly stammered. I never said that! But the waver in her voice betrayed her discomfort. Marcus pocketed his phone and turned to Layla, placing a reassuring arm around her shoulders. "We'll handle this," he said quietly, his tone filled with steely determination. They walked back to their car, their steps deliberate. Behind them, the agent stood frozen on the porch, her confident facade now shaken. What she didn't realize was that the wheels of her own downfall had already been set in motion. Once in the car, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. A few minutes later, he turned to Layla. "Wait here. Someone is on their way to straighten this out." Layla glanced at the house and the agent standing by the door, then nodded. "I'm waiting." 15 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up in front of the house. The door opened, and out stepped Edward Grant, a tall man with a commanding presence dressed in an elegant gray suit. His stern gaze and purposeful stride made it clear he wasn't here to waste time. The agent, standing on the porch, noticed him approaching and paled. She nervously adjusted her blazer and hurried down the steps to meet him, forcing a strained smile. "Mr. Grant, hello," she stammered. "What a surprise to see you here." Edward gave her a curt nod and walked right past her, heading toward Marcus and Layla, who were waiting near their car. "Sorry for the delay," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "I had to interrupt a meeting to address this situation." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Edward. It's worth it. What we experienced here is blatant discrimination, and I wanted you to hear about it firsthand." Edward turned to the agent, his expression growing even colder. "Ms. Ellis, care to explain what's going on here?" The agent swallowed hard, struggling to compose herself. "Sir, this is just a misunderstanding. I didn't think this house was a good fit for these clients." "Not a good fit?" Edward repeated, his voice sharp as ice. "And what exactly made you decide that?" The agent panicked, her eyes darting between Edward, Marcus, and Layla. "Well, I just wanted to make them aware of the neighborhood's high standards. It has very specific requirements." Edward raised a hand to silence her. "Let me clarify," he said, fixing her with an unflinching stare. "You decided Marcus and Layla Thompson weren't suitable for this house without bothering to find out that they are co-owners of the very agency you work for." The agent froze as if struck by lightning, her face turning ashen. "Co-owners?" she whispered. "Yes," Edward replied firmly, his voice calm but laden with authority. "They are your employers, Mr. Ellis. You refused to show a house to the people who help run this company." Ms. Ellis froze as if struck by lightning, her face turning ashen. "Co-owners?" she whispered. "Yeah," Edward replied firmly, his voice calm but laden with authority. "They are your employers, Ms. Ellis. You refused to show a house to the people who help run this company." Ms. Ellis's mouth opened, but no words came out. She staggered back a step, her legs visibly trembling. I didn't know. This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to offend anyone." Marcus stepped forward, his expression calm but steely. "You told us this house was not for us and suggested we look elsewhere. That's not a mistake. That's a deliberate choice based on your prejudice assumptions." Once in the car, Marcus wasted no time. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number with precision, his tone sharp and resolute as he spoke. The conversation was brief, but by the time he hung up, a sense of finality lingered in the air. He turned to Layla, who sat watching the house with unwavering focus. "Wait here," Marcus said, his voice steady but loaded with intent. "Someone is on their way to straighten this out." Layla raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "I'll be right here," she said calmly, her voice belying the fire simmering beneath her composed exterior. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the hum of passing cars and the faint laughter of the family inside the house. Then, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up smoothly in front of the property. The door opened, and out stepped Edward Grant, a tall man whose commanding presence seemed to fill the entire street. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. The agent, Miss Ellis, noticed him immediately. Her confident demeanor from earlier evaporated as she paled visibly. Adjusting her blazer nervously, she hurried down the porch steps, her forced smile barely masking her unease. "Mr. Grant, hello?" she stammered, her voice a shaky attempt at professionalism. "What a surprise to see you here." Edward barely acknowledged her, offering only a curt nod before brushing past her and striding toward Marcus and Layla. He extended his hand to Marcus. "Sorry for the delay," he said, his deep voice carrying authority. "I had to interrupt a meeting to address this situation." Marcus shook Edward's hand firmly. Thank you for coming. It's worth it. What we experienced here isn't just wrong, it's blatant discrimination, and I wanted you to hear about it firsthand. Edward's expression darkened as he turned to face Ms. Ellis, his eyes sharp as ice. Ms. Ellis, he began, his tone cold and deliberate. Care to explain what's going on here? The agent visibly shrank under his gaze, struggling to find her words. Sir, this is just a misunderstanding, she said quickly, her voice faltering. I, I didn't think this house was a good fit for these clients. Edward tilted his head slightly, his stare unrelenting. Not a good fit, he repeated, his words cutting through the air like a blade. And what exactly made you decide that? Ms. Ellis's gaze darted nervously between Edward, Marcus, and Layla. Her breathing quickened as she stammered, well, I just wanted to make them aware of the neighborhood's high standards. You know, it has very specific requirements. Edward raised a hand, silencing her instantly. Let me clarify something for you, he said, his voice calm but loaded with unmistakable authority. You decided Marcus and Layla Thompson weren't suitable for this house without realizing they are co-owners of the very agency you work for. The words landed like a thunderclap. Ms. Ellis froze, her face draining of color as her eyes widened. Co-owners? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, Edward confirmed, his tone even but unyielding. They are your employers, Ms. Ellis, and you just refuse to show a home to the people who help run this company. Ms. Ellis staggered back a step, her legs trembling visibly. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't know. This is a mistake, she stammered, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to offend anyone. Marcus stepped forward then, his expression calm but his tone firm and cutting. You told us this house wasn't for us, he said, his voice resonating with quiet strength. You suggested we look elsewhere. That's not a mistake, Ms. Ellis. That's a deliberate choice based on your prejudiced assumptions. Layla, standing just behind him, folded her arms across her chest, her gaze steady and unflinching. For the first time, Mrs. Ellis realized the gravity of what she had done. That's unacceptable, Layla said, her voice firm and unwavering. Her eyes locked on Ms. Ellis, who now seemed smaller under the weight of her words. You didn't just refuse to assist us. You insulted us. Edward's expression grew colder as he turned to Ms. Ellis. Disappointment was etched into every line of his face. Your actions violate not only our agency's policies, but also the law. What you've done here is discriminatory, unethical, and indefensible. I'll be reporting this incident to HR, and our legal team will address your behavior. Please, Ms. Ellis exclaimed, stepping forward with desperation in her voice. Her professional facade had crumbled entirely. This was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean it. I'll apologize. Edward shook his head slowly. Apologies won't fix this. You had the chance to act professionally, and you failed. Discrimination isn't a mistake. It's a choice. He turned to Marcus and Layla, his demeanor softening slightly. Would you like to see the house? I'll personally give you the tour. Layla exchanged a glance with Marcus, her hand slipping into his as he nodded. Of course, Marcus replied confidently. Together they walked past Ms. Ellis, who stood frozen on the porch, her face pale and her body rigid. Edward opened the door, holding it wide as he gestured for them to enter. This incident won't go unnoticed, he said as he stepped inside and closed the door behind them. I'll ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Inside, Edward led them through the house, showcasing every detail with a professionalism that made it clear he understood the gravity of the moment. The spacious rooms were flooded with natural light. The bright kitchen overlooked a lush garden, and the cozy living room featured a fireplace that seemed to welcome them home. Layla's lips curved into a soft smile as she lingered by the window, imagining their children playing in the backyard. Marcus, meanwhile, mentally noted where the home office could be set up, already envisioning the life they could build here. The house is stunning, Marcus said with certainty, and now I know for sure. It's going to be ours. Edward nodded firmly. It's yours whenever you're ready. I'll ensure all the paperwork is prepared for signing immediately. As they exited the house, Marcus and Layla walked arm in arm, their steps steady and assured. Mrs. Ellis was still standing on the porch, clutching her folder as if it could shield her from the consequences of her actions. Her face was pale and her hands trembled as she took a hesitant step forward. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, please, she began, her voice cracking. Let me explain. Layla turned to her, her gaze icy yet composed. "There's nothing to explain," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "Your actions speak louder than your words ever could." Marcus joined in, his tone measured but firm. "We built this agency to fight discrimination, and yet you've shown us it still exists within our own walls. You've left us no choice." Mrs. Ellis froze, her lips moving soundlessly for a moment before she seemed to accept the futility of her pleas. She turned and hurried away, her steps unsteady as the reality of her situation sank in. Edward turned to Marcus and Layla, his expression resolute. "I'll handle her termination," he assured them, "and will make inclusivity training mandatory for all employees. I give you my word, this will not happen again." "Thank you, Edward," Marcus said, his tone sincere but firm. "We appreciate it." As the couple walked back to their car, the weight of the moment began to lift. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about drawing a line in the sand and standing firm in the face of prejudice. "Not happen again." "Thank you, Edward," Marcus said. "We appreciate it." The next day, the story of Marcus and Layla's experience swept across social media like wildfire. Layla had shared the details in a heartfelt post, describing the agent's blatant discrimination and their determination to create an industry where such behavior had no place. The post wasn't just about them. It was a rallying cry for justice and equality. "This isn't just about buying a new home," Layla wrote. "It's about standing up against prejudice and creating a world where everyone feels they belong, regardless of race, gender, or background." Her words struck a chord, and within hours the post went viral. Thousands of comments poured in, filled with support, outrage, and gratitude. People shared their own stories of discrimination, while others commended the Thompsons for turning an ugly incident into a call for change. Media outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the systemic bias still plaguing industries like real estate. Layla sat on the couch, reading through the comments with Marcus. "Look at this," she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and hope. "This isn't just about us. So many people have gone through the same thing. It's overwhelming." Marcus nodded, his hand resting on hers. "But it shows why this fight is so important. If our story can inspire change, it's worth every bit of it." Weeks later, their new home came alive with warmth and celebration during their housewarming party. Friends, family, and colleagues filled the space with laughter, conversation, and the delicious aroma of home-cooked meals. The walls of the house, once a symbol of exclusion, now reverberated with joy and community. As the evening wound down, Marcus stepped onto the porch, the cool night air brushing against his face. He gazed up at the stars, a quiet smile forming as he reflected on how far they had come. "We did it," he said softly as Layla joined him, her hand slipping into his. "Yes, we did," she replied, her eyes sparkling, "and we'll keep fighting to make sure stories like this never happen again." The house, beautiful and welcoming, had become more than just a home for the Thompsons. It was now a symbol of resilience and courage, proof that standing up to injustice can pave the way for lasting change. In the weeks that followed, significant changes rippled through the agency. Edward, true to his word, implemented mandatory inclusivity training for all employees, ensuring that no one else would experience what Marcus and Layla had. Stricter policies against discrimination were enforced, and Ms. Ellis's termination served as a stark reminder of the consequences of bias and unprofessionalism. But Marcus and Layla didn't stop there. They used their platform to advocate for inclusivity and diversity in the real estate industry. Their story became a rallying cry, inspiring individuals and organizations alike to confront systemic inequities and commit to meaningful change. As the Thompsons settled into their new life, their home became a hub of progress and purpose. The housewarming party wasn't just a celebration of their victory, it was a declaration of their ongoing mission to challenge injustice wherever it appeared. For the Thompsons, this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning.